open our Bibles this morning to Lamentations chapter number 3. Lamentations chapter number 3. And this morning we're going to begin a new series entitled Hope. Hope is a powerful thing. It's a light that can help us out of the darkest situations in our lives. But without hope, even the smallest of circumstances can completely overwhelm and destroy us. Have you ever felt hopeless? I know I have. There's been times in my life where I've looked at the situations, I've looked at what's going on in my life, and I have felt hopeless. Now, for those of you who are watching online, I want you to tell me, what is the situation where you felt hopeless? What were the circumstances? What was going on that brought these feelings of hopelessness within you? For me, it was quite a few years ago now, but there was a time in our home where we got lice and bed bugs like almost exactly at the same time. It was literally like the plagues of Egypt had been rained down upon us. And we had lice first. Well, I should say they had lice first because the girls got it. I did not. And we had 4 girls with really blonde, light blonde hair at that point. All had long hair. And the amount of time and energy that it takes to pick through and get lice out of all their hair. Thank God for my wife and for Lanita, who came over and spent hours and hours going through the girls' hair. But around that same time that we had lice, my wife and I started to notice these different bug bites across the girls. And so we went to their doctor and we showed him what was going on and asked his opinion on it. And he said, this is jiggers, so just when you let them go outside to play, make sure you put bug repellent on them. Everything's going to be fine, no big deal. So we did that, and I don't remember how long it was that we did that. Every time the little girls went out to play, we just sprayed them down with bug spray, but the problem didn't go away. In fact, it kept getting worse and worse, and we actually discovered what was going on by accident, and it was a literal accident. One of the girls had wet the bed, so my wife and I went in there to change the sheets and the bedding and everything else, and when we pulled the mattress back, there were hundreds upon hundreds of bed bugs crawling underneath the mattress. And I just remember feeling totally overwhelmed at that point. I was so I felt horrible as a parent. You know, here I am for probably weeks sending my girls to bed every night so that these bugs could come and bite them. And it was horrible. It was disgusting. It was gross. Like, it's still, even thinking about it right now, I can see pulling back the mattress, all the bugs, and just my skin crawls when I think about it. And then there was the hours and hours of cleaning, hours and hours of laundry. And you're talking about thousands of dollars to get rid of these bed bugs. And at that point, our budget was tighter than my pants are right now during quarantine. So in that moment, at that time, things felt pretty hopeless. And maybe that's the way that you feel right now. Maybe you feel hopeless. I mean, we're at such a strange time in life and in our society with this pandemic, with COVID-19 going on, where we're all kind of locked away in our homes and separated from friends and family and church and the people that we love, and a lot of times that can leave us feeling hopeless. Some of you have lost your jobs, and along with that, you have a loss of identity. You're worried about finances and all that stuff, and bills coming in, and it can just feel like hopeless. Maybe you've lost a loved one. And I don't know, it's never easy to lose a loved one. It's never easy. But I don't know if there's a more depressing and sad time to lose a loved one than right now. with all the social distancing guidelines and everything else, to have literally just a couple of people together, where normally you have all the friends come together, all the family, the church gathers together, and so you're surrounded by that love, that support, and that encouragement. And so maybe you've lost a loved one, and because of that, you've lost hope. That person was your source of strength, your rock, your help, your encouragement, and now that person is gone, and that can leave us hopeless. Some of you are dealing with broken marriages, broken relationships, broken homes, and man, what a sense of hopelessness that can bring. Jeremiah certainly felt that way. He understood what it was like to be without hope. And here we are in Jeremiah chapter number 3. Let's pick up in verse number 18. And I said, okay, so Jeremiah is speaking here, my strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. Remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall, my soul hath them still in remembrance and is humbled in me. Now, for those of you that aren't as familiar with the book of Lamentations, Lamentations was written by the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah has a book that he penned already. This is another book that he penned. And in Lamentations here, Jeremiah is mourning for the people of Israel. The children of Israel had chosen to walk away from God, and because of that, God removed his hand of protection upon them. Remember the covenant that he had with his people. He said, hey, if you follow me, if you love me, if you obey me, do what I want you to do, then I will bless you. I will bless you so greatly that you will not be able to run far enough. You won't be able to run fast enough to get away from the blessings. And I'll protect you. Your enemies will run before you. All these wonderful blessings that were promised if they would just walk with God. But God never forces any of us to do anything. Going all the way back to the Garden of Eden, God did not force Adam and Eve to walk with him and love him and serve him. He gave them a choice. And he gives all of us a choice. He gave Israel a choice, and they chose to walk away from God. So God says, hey, you can choose to walk away, but if you do, I want you to understand there's a curse that comes with that, because they were in a covenant relationship with God. In a covenant relationship, there were pronounced blessings, and there were also pronounced cursings. So he says, if you keep the covenant, if you walk with me, these are the blessings, and protection was included in that. But he said, if you choose to walk away, there's cursings, and your enemies are going to come in, and they're going to destroy. And that's exactly what happened. They chose to walk away, and so Babylon comes in, ransacks and destroys the entire country, destroys the temple, takes many of the children of Israel captive. And Jeremiah had been a witness to these things, and now the place is left desolate, and Jeremiah feels hopeless. He says in verse number 18, my strength and my, what's the next word? Hope. He said, my strength is gone, my hope is perished. My hope is dead. I've lost all hope. That inner strength within me is gone now, that hope that would kind of push us on. We talked about how powerful hope is. If we have hope, man, we can push through just about anything. But when that hope is gone within us, we're in big trouble. And Jeremiah says, my strength is gone and my hope is dead. It's dead. And he looked around at the situation and said, hope, there's no hope. We're hopeless now. What are we going to do? Now, I don't want you to think that you're alone in feeling hopeless. God's mouthpiece felt hopeless at times too. I mean, this is God's prophet, the one who speaks on behalf of God to the people, and he says, my hope is dead. But part of Jeremiah's problem, and it's the same problem we have too, is that he continued to dwell on the negatives instead of the positives. He focused on the negatives. Look at verse 19 and 20. Look at the negatives that he's focusing in on. He says, verse 19, remembering my affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall. He says, my soul hath them still in remembrance and is humbled in me. He's thinking about the destruction. He's thinking about the chaos. Now, I'm not getting down on him because I'm prone to think and dwell on the negatives too. Naturally, I tend to be a pessimist. I tell people I'm a realist, but in reality, I'm a pessimist. I dwell on the negatives. Jeremiah is dwelling on the negatives. And these feelings of hopelessness that he had would not change until he stopped dwelling on the negatives and started focusing in on the good things of God. He had to change what it was that he thought about. Paul had that advice for the Philippians. That church in Philippi, he writes in Philippians chapter number 4, be careful for nothing. In other words, you don't have to worry about stuff. And some people are so worried right now. They're worried about the virus. They're worried about money. They're worried about their job. They're worried about a loved one. Worried about a relationship, worried about the future and what's going to happen and what's all the different outcomes that could possibly happen, and worry. And Paul, under inspiration of the Holy Ghost, said, hey, listen, you don't have to worry about anything. And look at the remedy here. He says, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So he says, hey, don't worry. Instead, pray. Instead, give thanks. And when you do that, God's peace will rule in your heart instead of letting fear and worry and hopelessness rule. Then he says, here's how you make the change. Here's how you go from worry to having peace. Here's how you go from feeling hopeless to being hopeful. He says, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are honest, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. So he says, stop worrying and start thinking about the right things. There's something about positive thinking. Now, I'm not one of these people that say if you think it, if you dream it, it's going to come to pass. But what we dwell on changes how we see things. Think about it for just a minute. I drive a Honda Odyssey minivan. Not by choice. I would not choose to drive a minivan. But I drive one. Now, before I drove a Honda Odyssey minivan, I never saw a minivan on the road. Now as I drive around, I see Honda Odyssey minivans everywhere. I have a Honda CR-V. Before I got that CR-V, I couldn't point one out on the road. Was not on my radar at all. Now I see them all the time. Why? Because it's in my mind now. So because it's in my mind, that's what I choose to see. And some people dwell on the negative things, so the negative is all that they see. They listen to the news media and just listen to all the negative stuff and the garbage that's being spewed out 24/7, the negative, and their whole outlook on life is negative. And then we wonder why these feelings of hopelessness just rise up within us. We have to change what it is that we're thinking about. Stop dwelling on the negatives. Start dwelling on the positive things. Once Jeremiah changed what he focused on, then his outlook changed from one of hopeless to being hopeful. Look at Jeremiah 3. We'll continue on. Verse number 21 says this. This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. So he says, I started thinking on something else. He pushed away the negative things, the destruction of the temple, the ruin of the nation, all the captivity, everything else. Pushed that aside, and he began to think on something else. And it was because he changed his mind that he found hope. He went from saying, hope is dead, to saying, now I have hope. Well, what is it that he brought back to mind? What is it that he chose to think about instead of thinking about the negative, the destruction, the problems? What is it that he chose to think about? And that's what we're going to look at the next 4 weeks together. Is we're going to look at the things that he thought about. And the first one here that we're going to see that he chose to think about, which brought his hope from being dead to being alive, was he hoped in God's mercy. He thought about God's mercy. Now, God's mercy is not to be confused with God's grace. Grace is God giving us the good things that we do not deserve. It's Him pouring out the blessings and all those sorts of things. God's mercy is Him withholding from us the things that we do deserve. Do you see the difference? Grace is Him giving us good things that we do not deserve. Mercy is God withholding the things that we actually deserve. And in Jeremiah 3, verse number 22, he says this, "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not." Just when all hope seemed lost for Jeremiah, just when he said, hey, hope is dead, he thought about the mercy of God. As bad as things were, Jeremiah was reminded that things can always be worse. Now, understanding that things could always be worse for us in no way minimizes the situations and the problems that we face. It doesn't downplay those things at all. In remembering that things could be worse, Jeremiah was not saying that the destruction of the temple, the ruin of the nation, the captivity of God's people was no big deal. That's not what he was saying. What he was doing is saying, when we think about it and we remember that things could always be worse, it puts my situation in the proper perspective. It puts it back in perspective. Because what we tend to do is we tend to just laser focus in on the problems, and we get them right in front of our face, so that's all that we can see. All I can see is the negative. All I can see is the fact that I can't hang out with my friends, I can't go to church, I can't be with my family, I can't work, I can't shop, I can't do all this stuff. We tend to focus in on the negative. My loss, my broken relationship, my whatever, and we focus in right here on this. And when I'm focused in like this, I can't see anything else but the problem. That's all I can see. But when I take a step back, then I get a proper perspective of my situation in the world. Jeremiah took a step back and he got a perspective. You know, I think about my girls. And one of my girls' favorite phrases used to be, "That's not fair." That's not fair. They would fight and argue about certain things. Man, that's not fair. One sister would get an opportunity maybe that the other sisters don't have. That's not fair. That's not fair. And we settled that very quickly. Because I taught them that we don't want what's fair. If you got what's fair, you would burn in the lake of fire right now. If I got what was really fair, I'd burn in the lake of fire. And some of us are looking at our current situation and everything that's happening. Some have lost their jobs, and they're looking at other people that haven't, saying, man, it's just not fair. Some people are looking at, hey, well, Walmart can be open, and we can't be open. That's not fair. And we look at our current situation, and we're always evaluating what other people have versus what we have, opportunities they get versus opportunities I get, and we just look around a lot like my daughters, and that's not fair. But the reality is, if every single one of us got what was fair today, we would be in the lake of fire. And some of you are thinking, man, it's kind of harsh, isn't it? It's not harsh, it's a warning. It's the truth from Scripture. God tells us in Romans 3:23 that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. That every single one of us have done wrong. Every single one of us have broken God's rules. And just like there were repercussions in my household growing up when I broke my parents' rules, and just like there's repercussions for my daughters when they break my rules, there's repercussions when you and I break God's rules. But I don't get to dictate what the repercussions are. And you don't either. God is the one who dictates what the repercussions are because we've broken His rules. And in Romans 6:23, He says the repercussions, the payment of our sin is death. And Revelation chapter 20 explains that for us very clearly and tells us that spiritual death is eternity in the lake of fire. So that's what every single one of us deserve. It's what I deserve. It's what you deserve. And so Jeremiah tells us that the only reason we're not consumed right this very moment is because of the mercy of God. So he looked around and thought about the negative things, yes, horrible things, and he said, man, hope is dead. I have no strength within me. But then this little voice inside of him began to remember and began to think about the mercy of God and understanding that the only reason the entire nation hadn't been consumed in the moment was because of the mercy of God. The only reason Jeremiah had not been consumed was the mercy of God. And the same is true for me. The same is true for you. The only reason we are not consumed in this instant is because God is being merciful to each and every one of us. We do not want what's fair. We want God's mercy. You do not want what's fair today. You want God's mercy. In Titus 3:5, Paul writes to Titus and he says, not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to His, what's the next word? According to His, write it in the comments there. According to His mercy, He saved us. And if you've never trusted Jesus to be your Savior, I want to encourage you to accept His gift of mercy today. Jeremiah had hope because of God's mercy. He knew that even though they were going through this terrible time, that God would be compassionate to them because He is merciful. We read in Jeremiah 3, verse number 22, it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed because His compassions fail not. In 10 verses later, in Jeremiah 3:32, says, but though He cause grief, yet will He have, what's the word? Compassion according to the multitude of His mercies. God's mercies was one of the reasons Jonah refused to go to Nineveh. You remember that story? God said, hey, Jonah, I've got a job for you to do. I want you to get up from where you are, go to Nineveh, preach judgment against it because their sins have come up before me, and I'm ready to judge them for their sin. So you go tell them judgment's coming. Now, it seems like that'd be a great thing to do. It'd be a great job. I mean, here, these are the enemies of Israel. The Ninevites were Assyrian people that were absolutely cruel. ways they would torture and dismember their enemies and all this stuff. And I won't get into the gory details here this morning, but they were absolutely cruel to the children of Israel. And so you would think, hey, this would be a great thing. We can pronounce judgment on these people. But Jonah doesn't do that. And it's not because he's afraid for his life. He gets up and he decides he's going to go to the opposite end of the planet. He goes and tries to run away. And you remember what happens? God makes a big storm and prepares a fish. They throw him overboard. He's swallowed by the fish. Well, at the end of the book of Jonah, Jonah explains why he ran instead of going to pronounce judgment. And the reason he says he ran instead of pronouncing judgment was because he knew God was compassionate and he knew that God would have mercy. And he did not want the Ninevites to have mercy. So he thought, if I never go and pronounce judgment, if I never bring it up in front of them that God's going to destroy them, they'll never think to turn from their sin. And so God won't be merciful. He won't be compassionate. And that's the real reason Jonah didn't go to Nineveh. It was because he knew God was compassionate. He knew that God would be merciful. And Jeremiah understood God's mercy as well. He knew that God's mercy was a source of hope. Have you lost your hope because you've lost your job? Hope in God's mercy. My hope shouldn't come from the fact that I can earn a living. My hope should come because God is merciful. Have you lost a loved one and felt hopeless without them? Listen, I understand the pain. I understand the sorrow of losing somebody that you love. But remember God's mercy today. Are you dealing with a broken marriage, broken relationship, or broken home? Man, it could always be worse. Jeremiah remembered that. You could be stuck in a horrible situation. A broken relationship is better than being stuck in an abusive situation. It's better than being stuck in a horrible situation. And sometimes a broken relationship is the mercy of God being poured out in our lives. Trust in His mercy. Hope in the fact that He is merciful today. Does the pandemic have you feeling alone? Feeling hopeless? You're not alone. Take comfort in His mercy. We have such an opportunity to spread the hope that people need right now. People are feeling lost and hopeless in the midst of all of this. And we have an opportunity to share the hope of Jesus with them. He is the only hope, by the way. He's the only hope. A president is not the hope. Governor is not the hope that they're going to turn things around. The economy is not a hope. Jesus is the only source of true hope in this world. And if we are going to be able to spread that hope, then we have to take time to bring the mercy of God back into our minds. Remember Jeremiah's words. Chapter 3, verse 21 and 22. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not. I want to encourage you today. Hope in God's mercy.